Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome everybody to the Storytelling Association of California's genre stories tonight, folk and fairy tales. We're delighted to have you with us. I'm Sarah Armstrong. I'm the chair of the Storytelling Association of California, and I get to be your MC for tonight. Andy Laufer is our tech host, and we couldn't do this without him. We also have Shags Shagrin in the house, who's our treasurer and sets up all our web meetings and all our Zoom meetings. And again, couldn't do it without him. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. So the way the night is going to go, we have 7 lovely tellers for you. Everyone has about 10 minutes to tell their story. And after everyone has finished telling the story, we'll bring everybody back to share what it is they're up to, what they want us to know about what's coming up, except for our first teller, whom I will start introducing now. Beverly Schwartz is from New York. So she's our first teller, and she might need to go to sleep in a little bit. So after she finishes telling, she's going to tell us what's up for her coming up next. Beverly is representing the Contra Costa Tail Spinners. She was an elementary teacher for 35 years in Troy, New York. She developed an award-winning STEM program, science, technology, engineering, and math. She's now retired and has become a storytelling in the US and worldwide. She's also a gardener and works with animal rescue groups. Beverly, welcome, and please tell us a story.
Thank you. Tonight's story is called The Brewery of Eggshells. Susan Ida Bucco and myself, Beverly Schwartz, took 2 versions of this fairy tale. The first one was published in 1844, making sure I got the right one, and that was in Ireland. And the second version was from England in 1894. We combined these 2 versions of The Brewery of Eggshell and created our own. And now I'd like to present you The Brewery of Eggshells. There once lived a couple, Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, and they had twin boys, and Mrs. Sullivan nursed them tenderly every night. One day, Mrs. Sullivan got called to a neighbor's house at some distance away. Now, she had heard that there was goblins and goblets in the area, and they were exchanging human children for dwarfs. But since her neighbor had a real emergency, she decided to rush over, and she would rush back. So she went to her neighbor's house, and on the way home, as she was rushing back on the path, goblins and goblets passed her, past the pit right in front of her on the pathway. And it was midday, and they usually aren't seen during the day. She got real scared and rushed home and rushed into the bedroom and looked into the cradles, but there were her children sleeping contently. She was so relieved. But a few days later, her twin boys started screeching and crying, and they shriveled up into mere skeletons. And she didn't know what to do. And she started telling her neighbors about her boys and said, what's happening? And they said, beyond a reasonable doubt, her boys had been switched and were now 2 ugly dwarfs. Oh my goodness. Well, as she started telling everyone in town about, the village, what was happening to her boys. And they kept saying, beyond a reasonable doubt, that they were switched. And they tried to comfort her by telling her what she could do to get her boys back. Now, even though despite being shriveled and just screeching and looking like mere skeletons, one of the problems was they had a strong resemblance to her own children. And her neighbors were telling her what to do to get them back. Well, one neighbor said, what you do is you take 2 red hot tongs and you burn their noses off. She didn't want to injure her children. Another neighbor said, you take a hot griddle and you burn them alive. No, she couldn't do that. And the other one said, if there's snow on the ground, you throw them in the ground in the snow and you leave them there. But because of that strong resemblance to her children, she didn't have it in her heart to hurt those in the cradle. There was a great strife that arose in the village because she wouldn't listen to anyone to tell her what to do to get her children back. And one night she was sitting by that fireplace. Oh, what can I do to get my children back? Then she had an idea. I know. I am going to go down to the village and I'm going to ask the old wise woman, Ellen Leah of the village, what to do. The next morning, as soon as the sun rose, she got dressed and ran down to the village and knocked on Ellen Leah's door. And the doors swung wide open. And Ellen Leah said, Mrs. Sullivan, you're in grief this morning. What's wrong? Yes, I am in grief this morning. I have every right to be, Ellen, because my children were whipped out of their cradles without asking or telling me. And they were switched by two ugly dwarfs. So yes, I am in grief this morning. Are you sure that they were switched by dwarfs? Yes, I am positive. Every mother knows her children. My children were switched by dwarfs. Well, will you take the advice of an old wise woman? I'll do anything at this point to get my children back. So listen carefully, and you do exactly what I tell you to do. You take the shell of hen's eggs, and you're going to prepare them like you're getting them ready for the dinner for the reapers. You make some porridge and you boil them over the fire. And you pour them into the empty shells of the hen's eggs. And then you put them on a tray and you pour the porridge into the shells and you walk out slowly to the door. And then stand outside the door and listen. If you hear those in the cradle speak beyond the understanding of children, you take them out of the cradles, take them in your arms, and you run to the nearest river and throw them in. But if you do not hear anything that the children say that are unbelievable or beyond the understanding of children, do no injury or harm to them. So the day of the reap came. Mrs. Solomon took the eggshells and scooped them out. She put her porridge into the fire and boiled it, and slowly and gently poured the soup into the shells of the eggs and put them on the tray. And she slowly walked to the door and stood outside. And she listened and listened. And all of a sudden, she heard those in the cradle talk. Acorn before oak I knew, an egg before a hen, but I never heard of an eggshell brew, a dinner for healthy men, for harvest men. They had talked. She dropped the tray and went crashing to the ground. She ran into the cribs. She took those two dwarfs, held them in her arms, and ran to the nearest river. And she threw them in. And then as she turned out of the corner of her eye, she saw two goblins in blue trousers run out of the woods, jump in the river, and save the dwarfs. She ran as fast as she could back to the cottage and into the bedroom. And there in the cradle were her twins sleeping. They had returned. They were back in her home. She got her twins back, and she picked up those twins and she nursed them tenderly. Thank you.
Oh, Beverly, that was awesome. That was fabulous. And so glad there's a happy ending. Thank goodness. That recipe, though, we have to think about that recipe. I'm not so sure. So thank you so much, and tell us what's coming up with you. What do you got planned?
Well, I was the founder of the first program in the world of STEM. And I'm trying to get the program back on the elementary level. And I'm taking some of the STEM stories and I'm going around the world and telling all the funny things and that happened in the very first years that we created this program. And I'm also telling stories about my own experience in the classroom and in life. And I'm a new storyteller. I've only been storytelling since the virus. So I'm still on a learning curve. But the thing I like the most about storytelling is meeting all people like all of you and all in the other storytelling world. And I'm really enjoying just being part of the world again.
Super. And some people came in after you had put in the chat your contact information, so they won't have it. So if you would put it in again, then people will be able to reach you.
Okay, I'll be glad to. And just a brief, one other thing is I was given the 1990 Christy McAuliffe Award for starting this. And the goal of the program was to take a program and spread it throughout the US as a new program. And now it's world known. And Jane Pauley did do a special on me on NBC News. And I had the first 501c3 non-for-profit organization in New York State for STEM in the world. So I'm very proud of what I've done. And I do hope that if you want to know any information of how to start your own program, it's on my website.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So thank you for joining us, and sweet dreams.
I will try to stay awake.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you. So our next storyteller is Laura Bosworth, who's representing the Long Beach Storytellers. Now, she's been producing storytelling concerts in Long Beach for over 20 years. And she's enjoyed meeting so many wonderful tellers. A teller in her own right, she's here with us tonight, and she says she's overjoyed to be here. Well, we're overjoyed to have you. So please, Laura, tell us a story.
All right. Thank you so much. And I am overjoyed to be here. And I will set a little, just to let you guys know, I live in the path of the Long Beach airport. And during the last story, 5 airplanes flew over. So you hear a big noise. But today I want to tell you a story that takes place in the land of fairy tales, specifically in the kingdom of Once Upon a Time. And in the kingdom of Once Upon a Time, there lived, as you can imagine, kings and queens, dragons and unicorns, fair maidens, knights with shining armor. And any one of them would make a fantastic story. But not today. Today, I want to tell you about a certain princess who, quite frankly, was sick of the whole damn mess. She'd had enough of the fairy tale predictable plot twists and turns. Just one time, she wanted to see a beauty fall in love with a beast and marry him without first waiting for him to transform. Or how about, an ugly duckling who grew up to be a homely duck with feathers that stuck out everywhere, but still went on to have a productive life. And just once, she wanted to see a fair maiden decide that, you know what? 7 little men are better than just one prince any day. But it didn't happen. Not in the land of fairy tales. The happy ending was expected. It was needed. It was boring. Well, eventually, the princess's mother, the queen, decided it was time for the princess to move on to her own happily ever after away from the queen's. So every time the princess turned a corner in the castle, she would find a spinning wheel or maybe a frog looking at her a little expectantly. In her closet, she discovered all of her shoes had been switched out for glass slippers. And in the kitchen, there materialized a bowl of some very questionable looking apples. And the princess would have none of it. So the queen decided she would start her with something simple, something basic that she couldn't possibly mess up. So she told her that her grandmother, who lived on the other side of the forest, had been feeling a little ill, and she wondered if the princess would bring her a basket of goodies. Well, the princess had grown up in the land of fairy tales. She knew a setup when she saw one. But a walk outside the castle did sound like a nice idea, so she put on her cloak and her hood, and hers was purple, got her basket of goodies, and started off down the road to grandmother's house. She had no sooner entered the forest when out from behind a tree came the big bad wolf. He had white fangs dripping. He had claws that he could move around. He had ebony fur all over his muscular body. The princess looked into those glowing red eyes, and she found that very interesting. The wolf said to her, "Aha! Where are you going, little girl, with your basket of goodies?" And the princess said, "Well, I'm on my way to grandma's, surprise. But I don't really think she's very sick, and I could probably take my time, and I'm wondering if you would happen to know where a girl could get a cup of coffee." Well, now the wolf was big and the wolf was bad, not good at improv. And he said, "Coffee? Well, don't you need to get to grandmother's? I know a shortcut." And the princess said, "Oh, please. We both know where this is going. I'm going to wind up with a woodsman. And while I do like a man in flannel, I think that wolf or that fur is a nice option too. Besides, I've always said that a wolf in the hand is better than a woodsman in the, well, anyway, about the coffee." Well, by then they were completely off script. So the wolf took her down the road and around the bend to the Badlands of Fairy Tale Land. She had never been there before. He took her to the Bad Witch's bakery, where they had some very decent coffee, but passed on the children-shaped cookies. They were rather chewy. He told her all about the Badlands of Fairy Tale, where the crooked man lived at the top of a crooked hill, and the home for retired stepmothers where nobody ever visited. And the princess found the whole thing very intriguing. Well, eventually he took her back to the road so she could continue on to grandmother's house. And when she got there, because they didn't have to worry about who had the biggest eyes and who had the biggest ears, she and grandma had a real conversation. Grandma told her about the olden days in fairy tale land, the days before the mouse, when a wicked queen would dance to her death in those red-hot boots, when a little mermaid perished from her silly wishes. And the princess found the whole thing very fascinating. Well, eventually she made her way home, and when she got there, the queen asked her, "Where's the woodsman?" And the princess told her all about the interesting wolf she had met and the intriguing places he showed her and the fascinating stories grandma had shared. And the queen just had to go lay down. But the princess paid no mind. And she went out into the land of fairy tales, and she began to tell everybody what she had learned. If she saw a princess ready to kiss a frog, she would point out that if you turn a frog into a prince, you just get a prince with warts that you can't see. If she saw a young man ready to climb up long locks of hair to the top of a tower, she would point out that, you know what, any woman with hair that long has got to be incredibly high maintenance. She lobbied for safety features on spinning wheels, for equal rights for elves, for Dr. Scholl's inserts to come standard in every pair of glass slippers. And soon everybody in the whole land of fairy tales thought that princess was a royal pain in the ass. But she didn't care. And she went on to live a life that was interesting, intriguing, fascinating, and happy ever after.
Oh, Laura, that was hysterical. I loved
Thank
it.
you. Well,
Thank you
so much.
so much. So creative. That was, I'm giggling here. I had to go on mute so I wouldn't disturb you. Thank you so very, very much. So we'll come back with you at the end to hear what's up next for you in Long Beach. Thank you so much. Ah, wow. We're off to a great start, folks. Well, our next storyteller is Peter Severainen. He's representing the Story Masters of Los Angeles. He grew up listening to stories by his parents and his grandmother in the Netherlands. He's continuing that tradition. As a consulting arborist and landscape architect, he talks to, touches, and smells the leaves and flowers of plants and trees. His story for tonight is The Clever Thief, about a very smart thief who lived long ago when Korea was still a kingdom. Peter, take us away.
Okay. A long time ago, there lived, when Korea was still a kingdom at the time, an old thief. He was very smart. He had never been caught. But you know how it goes. One day, he, for whatever reason, was careless. And before he knew it, he got arrested just for stealing a handful of spices in a grocery store. Well, the police were overjoyed when they caught him, and they immediately took him to the most severe judge they could find, who did not hesitate to order him to pay a huge fine. And when he could not pay that, the judge said, all right, then you go to jail for 5 years. Now, as soon as the thief got to jail, he looked around, he scouted whatever he could, and he thought it would take him far too long to escape, that there should be an easier way. And as soon as he had planned his escape, he sent a message to the jailkeeper, who also happened to be the royal jailkeeper for the whole country. And he said, I want you to take me to the king. Well, the jailkeeper heard that request and he started laughing and he said, why would the king want to see you? What do you have to contribute? The thief ignored his heckling and said, I have a gift, a very precious gift that's worth a lot of money for the king. And just as he had expected, as soon as the jailkeeper heard that, he started changing his whole attitude. And next day, an appointment was arranged with the king. The thief came there, and he noticed that besides the king, who was sitting on his big throne, there was also the prime minister, the secretary of state, the general of the army, and the chief jailkeeper. Well, what have you got for me? Said the king. I don't have all day to wait for you, you know. Your Majesty, said the old thief, I have for you a gift that is of high importance and really very valuable. But it comes with a condition. See, it only works for some people, but I will give it to you. And the thief pulled a little package out of his pocket in gold paper with a silver ribbon about it, and he gave it to the king. And the king started tearing off the paper. And then all of a sudden he saw what was inside, and immediately his face changed and he became furious and he said, how dare you give me an ordinary plumpet for a gift? The thief stayed very calm. And he said, you're right, Your Majesty. It is a plumpet, but ordinary? Oh no. This plum pit, if it gets planted right, will yield nothing but golden plums. And for a moment, the whole room was silent. And then the king, in his gruff tone, said, "Then why didn't you plant it yourself?" "Well, your majesty, as it turns out to be, only somebody who has never lied or never stolen in his life can reap that benefit. For everyone else, yes, it is an ordinary plum pit." So I thought immediately, let me take this to your majesty. Sure, you must be a man who has never stolen or never lied. Now, whatever faults the king had, he was honest. So he looked at the thief and said, "I'm sorry, I'm not the person." For a moment, the whole room was stunned, and they said, "Why not?" But the king remained silent. And the thief said, "Well, in that case, how about the prime minister?" But the prime minister looked down and his face turned red, and he said, "No, not me." He thought about all the times he had taken bribes from people who wanted a cushy government job, and he knew that the plum pit would not work for him. "Well then, how about the Secretary of State?" said the thief. But the Secretary of State too looked down and was embarrassed and said, "I'm not a person." He too had taken his share of bribes and knew the plum pit would not work for him. "Well," said the thief, "how about the general of the army?" But the general looked away, embarrassed, and said, "No, I can't do it." He had taken a little bit of money from each and every soldier's pay for years, so he had become a very rich man, but he knew that plum pit would not work for him. "Well, how about the jailkeeper then?" And the jailkeeper too looked down and said, "I can't do it." Whenever somebody got ordered to jail, the jailkeeper gave him a choice. You can get one of the best cells. It's still a cell, but it's much better than the other ones if you pay me. And if not, you get the drags and absolutely the worst I can give you. So that eliminated everyone in the room. The thief suggested some other people, and they were contacted, and everybody refused. And then a long silence fell in the room. And the thief looked at everyone, and he started laughing. And he said, "Look at you people. Everyone here has found a reason not to accept the plum pit. Every one of you can find some reasons why they have lied or taken something that did not belong to them. And now look at me. I am a thief. True, I have stolen my whole life, and I've never made a secret about it. And yet, unlike all of you who never went to jail, never got any sentencing, I was ordered to spend 5 years in jail. Is that fair?" There was a long silence in the room. And then the king spoke and said, "Gentlemen, I suggest that we all contribute to a fund big enough to get this thief out of jail. He has taught us a very valuable lesson. Sometimes kings and ministers forget what ordinary people have to deal with. And yet, here we have a thief who admits what he has done and gets sentenced way beyond anything that makes reason. So please contribute. And all the people in the room added their money. And soon there was more than enough to get the thief out of jail. The king called the thief to his throne and said, "Please take this money. You have shown us a valuable lesson, and we will take it to heart." And so it was that the very clever thief, with nothing more than a plum pit, got out of jail. Thank you.
Peter, that was lovely. Thank you. So interesting.
Wasn't it?
Really appreciate the lesson, and so glad that the king got it and was able to move forward. No, that was delightful. Thank you so very much. We'll bring you back at the end to hear what's next for you. Thank you, Peter.
Good.
Thank you so much. Wow, what an evening. This is delightful. Such a range of stories as we usually get. It's just always so interesting. Well, our next storyteller is Katie Mangan. She's co-host of Do Tell Story Swap in Sonoma County. Katie has been telling stories all her life, first as a child to herself and later to her daughters when they were young. She is inspired by the changing seasons and birds, animals, and plants that surround her. She loves the process of creating stories and the healing messages that they bring. Katie, please tell us a story.
Thank you. On the outskirts of town, there is a huge warehouse, and it's filled with shelves. And on the shelves are books, all different kinds of books. I know this because I'm one of them, but I'm different. My creamy white pages are blank, no pictures, no print. But you know, one day I got bored with this situation, and so I manifested myself a head and arms and legs and a body. And I jumped down off the shelf and I found my way to the back door and I pushed it open. And there I was, out in the street. But it was dusty and dirty, and I immediately wanted to be somewhere else. And with that thought, there I was. I was in the country, going down a small country road, and there were green fields and trees. And there was a little cottage built of stone with a thatched roof, advertising cream teas. And so I walked across the lawn and sat down at the table. Well, very soon someone brought a tray with tea, freshly baked scones, a dish of thick golden cream, and a pot of strawberry jam. And I could smell the strawberries even without taking the lid off. So I sliced the scone in half and I slathered on the cream and the jam and ate it, being very careful not to get any on my creamy white pages. It was delicious. Well, after my tea, I sat back and I congratulated myself. Why? I could be halfway up a mountain, you know, in a cloud with a strong wind blowing. And with that thought, there I was. I was going to turn back, but on the path was a little sign which said, "To a wise old man." And so I continued on. But you know, it got worse. And I was about to turn back, and there was another sign, "To a very wise old man." And so I continued on, and around a bend, I came out of the cloud into brilliant sunshine. And there on a ledge was the very wise old man, looking out on the view in a trance. And so I sat down beside him and I thought of a question to ask him. And then I turned to him. Oh, very wise old man, how can I create witty and brilliant stories? He just sat there. But then suddenly he turned to me, his brilliant blue eyes boring into my pages. Young book, if you want to create witty and brilliant stories, you must become a member of SAC, the Storytellers Association of California. And then he went back to his trance. Well, I was thinking about joining, but then I got distracted about this huge, beautiful dragon flying past with fire breathing out of its nostrils. And it did the backstroke and it came back. And I hadn't realized that the most beautiful princess had arrived. And she turned to me. Oh, don't you love Dragon? Oh, he's so athletic and agile. And so we both stood there and watched the dragon as he flew back and forth and round and round. But suddenly there was a fanfare of trumpets. Oh, wailed the princess. It's the prince. And out from the clouds, riding this white horse, came this impossibly handsome prince.
Never fear, my darling princess. I shall save you.
Oh, Dragon, go away. I don't need saving. Dragon's my friend. But the prince and the dragon had started to fight. And the princess looked at me. Oh, book, it's always the same. They fight and they fight until Dragon gets bored and then he lets the prince win. And then the prince says, because he won, I have to go and sit behind him on the saddle. And we ride off into the sunset. I mean, we go nowhere. We do nothing. It's so stupid and boring. Well, I guess the princess has had enough because she clapped her hands and she stamped her foot. Stop! Well, the prince was so startled, he did stop. My darling, what is wrong? Oh, prince, why don't you just go away? Get lost. Well, my darling, where shall I go? And we all thought about that. But it was a very wise old man who suddenly spoke. Young prince, I have 3 words for you. Hollywood, Southern California. And he pointed in the direction that we presumed was Hollywood, Southern California. And so we said goodbye to the prince and off he rode. And then the dragon and I asked the princess what she would like to do. Oh, you know what I really want? I want a cream tea. Do you know where I could get one? Yes, I do, I said. And so the princess and I, we climbed onto the dragon's back and the dragon flew us down the mountain. And very soon we were at the stone-walled cottage, the thatched roof, advertising cream teas. Well, the dragon didn't want a cream tea, and so he just lay on the grass under the trees. The princess, well, she really enjoyed the tea. And when she'd finished, she looked at me. Oh, book, I have an incy-wincy favour to ask you. Will you tell me a story? I mean, you must have hundreds of them inside you. Oh, it was my worst nightmare. I didn't know what to say. The words got stuck in my throat. And then I coughed. And all these letters, They just flew out, hundreds, thousands of them, and they danced all around us. And I saw that the letters were joining up and they were forming words. The words were forming sentences. The sentences, paragraphs, the paragraphs, chapters, and then they jumped inside of me. And there I was. I was a book. And I told the princess a story. Later, we heard that the prince was a great success in Hollywood. And the princess, the dragon, the very old wise man, and myself, well, we lived happily ever after. Blessings, abundance, healing to you all.
Oh, Katie, that was brilliant. That was just brilliant. And your voices, oh my goodness. And gosh, where can we get some cream tea? That sounds delicious.
In England.
Field trip, field trip. And
Yes.
thank you so very much. And we'll bring you back at the end to hear what's next for you. Oh, just delightful. Thank you. Thank you. Well, our next storyteller is David Tarvin. He's representing the Sacramento Storytellers Guild. David is a retired public servant turned storyteller. His favorite stories are historical fiction, and he currently tells stories to seniors in various facilities and via Zoom worldwide. David, please tell us a story.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Dave, and I do have a story. And this story begins the way that all good stories must. Once upon a time. Well, once upon a time, by some miracle or maybe misfortune, I got to work 20 minutes early. And rather than sit in my car, I went inside to the office and I went into my supervisor's office to get updated before my shift started. My supervisor was a young woman in her early 20s, and she was talking on the phone. And so I just leaned up against the old bookcase there and I waited for her to get off the phone, and conversation went on and on and on, and she seemed to become more and more and more agitated. She got off the phone and she just went on this thing. I mean, she just went on and on about this phone call and about that woman is my fiance's mother, and there's nothing I can ever do that makes her happy. She's always disappointed. She always complains. And then on top of that, last night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and I turned and I tossed and I turned, I tossed and turned all night long. And I am exhausted because I couldn't sleep all night. And she went on and on for about 20 minutes like that. But I just stood there and I listened. And when she was all done and she stopped and she kind of took a breath, I looked at her and I said, "Did you find the P?" And she was, "Oh, what are you talking about?" I said, "Come on, the fairy tale, the princess and the pea, you tossed and turned it all night. Did you find the P?" I said, "This is my attempt at humor." Well, she says, "I don't know what you're talking about. I've never heard any fairy tale about princesses and, some sort of pea." And I said, "Well, let me tell you the story of the princess and the pea." I said, long ago, in a small, small kingdom, way, way out in the country, up in the mountains, not at the top of the mountains, but kind of just outside of the foothills, was a very quaint, small kingdom with a much beloved king and queen and a handsome young prince. Now, the queen, she loved being the queen, and she was a pretty good queen. And she dearly, dearly, dearly loved that boy, her son, the prince, who is now a man. And she wanted him to marry. And so every day she would prompt him to find a princess to marry. Well, the prince, he kept kind of putting his mom off, and she became more and more frustrated with him. And finally, he said, I'm of age. I will find a princess and I will find it on my own. And so he started to scour the kingdom for a princess. And his mother, she was worried that he wouldn't find somebody good enough for her boy. Well, he scoured the kingdom to no avail. So he went to the next kingdom, and then to the next and the next and the next. And pretty soon he started going to different continents. He started to sail the 7 seas looking for that princess. And he traveled and he traveled and he traveled. And after seven long years, he gave up. He couldn't find his princess. So he came home. And his mother, greatly disappointed, said, you still need to get married and find a princess, and you need to do something. He said, I'm done looking. Well, that very night, late in the evening, a storm came into the kingdom, and it began to rain, and then it began to thunder, and then it began to strike lightning all over. There was this huge storm, and it just so happened that a young princess was making her way through the kingdom, and the lightning struck her coach, and she fell out of the coach, and the horses were so frightened they took off, and she was lost. Well, she began to wander down the road, and the rain just kept coming down, and she became soaked. Finally, as she wandered down the road, she saw the castle up there in the foothills, wandered up to the castle and knocked on the door. Well, a maid came to the door, and the princess said, I am a princess, and I am lost in this wonderful great land, and I need a place to stay. I need refuge from the storm. Well, the maid ushered her in, and then she went and got the queen and said, you know what? This woman says that she's a princess. And the queen came down into the foyer of the castle to see this young woman. And there she stood, her clothes sopping wet, her hair bedraggled and just soaked and stringy. And she was so soaked that the water just kept pouring off of her, and it went down her legs and actually dripped off and poured out of her shoes and made a pool on the floor. Now the queen, she didn't believe that this woman was a princess, but she decided that she would give her a room for the night, but that she would test her. So she went to the other maids and said, put 20 mattresses on the bed and put a pea right in the middle. She said, only a true princess would be able to feel that pea. Now, the maids all thought that was kind of silly, but the queen said, in order for the princess who will eventually become a queen, she must be sensitive. She must be sensitive to take care of my son. But more importantly, she must be sensitive in order to see and recognize the needs of our many people. Well, the maids hurried and they made up that bed, and it piled it up one after the other, 20 high. Well, the princess came in, she changes her clothes, she goes to sleep, and she slept just fine all night. But when she awoke in the morning, she thought, why are there 20 mattresses on the bed? So she thought, something's going on. And she sat at the edge of the bed, or at the bottom of the bed, rather. And she thought, this must be some sort of test. And so she reached under the mattress and she found that pea. So she said, I can pass this test. So she went down to breakfast and they all sat at the table and she went on and on and on and on about, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. I was up all night after that horrible, horrible storm. Well, the prince, he was enamored by her, seeing her dried. She was very pretty and she seemed pretty smart. He quickly fell in love. And the queen, when she went back up into that room to check the mattress, well, that sly princess, she had slipped that pea back underneath those mattresses. Well, as you can well imagine, the princess and the prince fell in love and they got married and they lived, of course, happily ever after. But there's a small addendum, which is they took that pea and put it in a special museum so that everyone in the land would know the importance of being sensitive and passing the test. Thank you.
Oh, David, thank you so much. I love it. And calling attention to the sensitivity for the purpose of ruling well. That's just lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. And we'll bring you back at the end to see what else you've got coming up.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Well, our next storyteller is Aunt Leanne. She's representing the Storytellers of San Diego, and she adores sharing stories and the ancient art of oral storytelling. She likes working song in and through her stories when appropriate. She's a professional storyteller, actor, teaching artist, and a coach, and has performed professionally for over 30 years. You're not that old.
I am.
Aunt Leanne, now this, pay attention. Aunt Leanne teaches annual Scotch classes as an excuse to learn more about the water of life and to drink it. Aunt Leanne is also the winner of National Storytelling Network's first ever virtual story slam. So people are going to be putting in the chat how they can sign up for that class, my dear. Meantime, please tell us a story.
You bet. If you happen to be in the neighborhood, please do let me know and I'll keep you informed. Well, Katie McLaren was the very best haggler in her family. Really, she was the best in the Glen, perhaps the whole county, and that was why she found herself at the market against her will. She had wanted to stay home with her mother, who was very close to her time, the end of her confinement. This pregnancy had not been easy, as Katie had always been told her own, and all of her 7 brothers had been. But the family needed supplies, her father needed a whetstone, and if they sent anyone but Katie, they'd have spent 3 times the amount. It was nearing the end of her time at the market. She had only her father's whetstone to get. She needed to go to the Bits and Bob's tent. It was fairly new at the market. There was an old, kindly couple who came and loved the game of bargaining with Katie. In she went. She looked around because the couple was serving a gentleman. Oh, the jewelry was so beautiful, and the goods were fantastic, and there were potions and ointments and whetstones, 7 identical. She didn't know how she would choose. Then she noticed one of the ointments had fallen off of the display and lost its lid. When she picked it up to try to return the lid and put the little can in its place, she got a bit on her eye. She rubbed on her finger and rubbed her eye. And everything in the tent changed. The fantastic goods, the marvelous jewelry she could see now were nothing but dross. The whetstones? All but one was completely unsound and would surely have fallen apart the moment she had brought it home. the jewelry was made out of tin. How could this be? She turned to the old kindly couple at the end of the counter, and they were neither kindly nor human. They had an unearthly pallor. Their eyes were metallic. They were fake. Now, Katie was too good a bargainer to let any of this show on her face. So she took some of the dross and the tin of ointment and the one good whetstone and placed it on the counter. 1 silver, she said, calling down to the couple who ordinarily would have expected a long game of back and forth. 4 silvers, they cried. But Katie didn't play that game. She swept all of the things into her basket, threw the 4 silvers on the counter, and said, "Done," as she ran out. She wanted to get home to tell her family of this amazing event. But when she got home, the McLaren's life had changed forever. She had a new baby sister with little red gold curls. But none of the McLaren children had a mother anymore. The story went out of her head. Katie's days became absorbed in looking after this baby and trying to help her father with the other children and the farm. 3 days into a week, and this child, when she smiled, the sun came out. But when she cried, she sounded like the bagpipes of war were coming over the hill and into the glen. Katie didn't know what to do. She was rocking and singing. She remembered a lullaby her mother had sung. I gave my love a baby, there's no crying. To her shock, this time it worked. She laid the little one down in the basket and turned to start milking the goats when an old woman came in their gate and up their path. I'm sorry, Katie said. My father is out in the field. If you'd only go get him, child, said the old woman. Katie looked at her sister. She was loath to pick her up. Oh, the screaming. The old woman seemed to know immediately what she was reluctant about and said, I'll stay and watch your bairn while you go and fetch your father. Katie didn't need to hear any more than that. Up she went and around to the back of the house, calling out to the fields. But when she and her father came back, the woman was gone. Katie rushed over to the basket. No, her sister was still in. She looked like she wasn't feeling very well. And just then she started to cry, but not the wailing, healthy bagpipe sound that Katie had gotten used to. Her father tousled her hair distractedly and went back to his work. Katie couldn't help feeling there was something really wrong. Well, this child got sicker and sicker. And by the end of the week, Katie was distraught. She put on her apron that she had last worn when she went to market. And there in the pocket, she found the tin of ointment. She didn't know why, but she took some again and put it on her eye. And when she looked at her little sister, there was no baby there at all. It was an old man with a beard, having a wonderful time pretending to be a sickly infant. Where's my sister? The little old man was quite surprised that Katie could call him out. I knew you were a sharp one, he said. Come, I'll take you. And with that, he took Katie's hand, and before she knew what was happening, the broom spun and she was flying over the woods out onto the moor to the fairy hill. The little old man said, I'm just a wee folk. I'll just push you in to see the royalty. And Katie was suddenly under the hill in the most magnificent throne room she'd ever seen. And there, at the end of the hall, was a queen. She came up to her slowly, letting none of the intimidation she felt show on her face. "Where is my sister?" The queen looked at the mortal in surprise. "I've heard of you, Katie McLaren. I met you once just to see if you were a bargainer, but you left something in a basket I couldn't resist." "Where's my sister?" said Katie, all fear leaving her. Why don't you play a game with me? Have you a riddle?" Well, Katie stopped and thought. The only riddle she could think of was from that lullaby. "How can there be a chicken without a bone?" And to her surprise, the queen's face dissolved in frustration. "I don't know that one. There can't be." "When it's piping," said Katie. "Fine," said the queen. "If you can find your sister among these babies, you can take her home." And to her horror, Katie saw a line of young fairy women, each carrying a baby that looked just like her sister. But Katie knew she had the upper hand. Pretending to take a handkerchief and dab at her eyes, she took a little more ointment and did both. And now she could see the other babies were nothing but sticks in the wind, and there was her sister. Unerringly, she went and picked her up and felt the little arms around her neck once more. "I've played your game," said Katie. "I'll be going home." And then she noticed that all the fae were staring at that little pot of ointment. "I don't suppose you'll mind giving us that pot, then," said the queen. And Katie said, "What will you give it? What will you give us for it?" "I'll let you go home safely," said the queen. And Katie, the best of all the bargainers, in all the family, in all the glen, in all the county, she said, "You'll give us safe passage. And as long as there are fae, and as long as there are McLaren, you will not bedevil my family again." And with that, the pot of ointment was taken from her hand, and she and her little sister were returned to their doorstep. Her father, bewildered, said, "Katie, look." For all throughout the kitchen were all the supplies that they would need to feed their family for months to come. They'll not bedevil us again.
Oh, well done. Well done. Thank you so much. Oh, Aunt Leanne, that was fabulous. And you brought some singing into it as well. Yeah. Very lovely. Very, very well done. Thank you. Those changelings, my goodness, they're something to worry about, I guess. Okay, our last teller for this evening is Cooper Braun. He's our featured teller, he's our guest teller, he's our Colorado representative. And let me tell you more about Cooper. I hope that most of you know Cooper and his work with Rachel Ann Harding and Stories with Spirit. We'll hear about that later, I'm sure. So Cooper says he was raised by granola-eating coyotes in Boulder, Colorado. Cooper was featured at the Exchange Place at the National Storytelling Festival in 2017, and he was awarded the 2018 J.J. Renault Emerging Artist Award and the 2022 Regional Excellence Award by the National Storytelling Network. Cooper's stories remind us that fairy tales were never just for children, that traditional stories can be funny, dark, poignant, and anything but dry. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Stories with Spirit, his company with Rachel Ann Harding, has become one of the leading producers of virtual storytelling shows. Their series, Fairy Tale Variations, has proved wildly successful, regularly attracting audiences of over 200 from around the world. And I'm so happy always to be one of those 200. Cooper, thank you for joining us. Tell us a story.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. This is the strange joy that we somehow discovered in the pandemic, is that I can be here with the Storytelling Association of California, and I'm sitting in Westminster, Colorado. So it's so lovely to be here. You know the story. I'm sure you do. It was not long after I had wed John Maurice. He summoned me, the new wife, my 2 girls, and Ella to him. He was going away on business to Nancy, and he asked us each in turn what we wanted him to bring us back as a gift. Now, my 2 daughters, Henriette and Dominique, they asked for dresses, silk and velvet, and well, they asked for sweets. I asked for pearls. The Vallon pearls really are the best, you know. And then little Ella, with dirt on her face and tangles in her hair, she had no words to ask for what she wanted. She wanted her mother back. She wanted this strange new woman and her 2 new sisters, who snubbed her because she wouldn't play with them, to leave and never return. But she didn't know how to say that. So she mumbled something about, "Bring me the first twig that brushes against your hat on your ride home." I don't know what it meant either. So it's true. It is true. I am Ella's wicked stepmother. But if that is the way the story must be told, then that is the way the story must be told. I can be the villain if you would like me to be. I was 32 years old when I married my second husband, hardly the gray-haired tyrant the stories would like to paint me to be. Jean Maurice is a merchant of considerable wealth, but then you know that. I had a noble title. He had money. Ella was 12. My daughters, Henriette and Dominique, were 11 and just 13. It seemed like a perfectly suitable match. And so I became the mistress of a house far more opulent than that of my first husband, and he was a baron. And in the middle of it, I found a young woman who, a girl really, she refused to let her maid do anything with her hair. She positively looked as if she hadn't washed her face in a week. I discovered it had all started when, well, her father had demanded that she take off the mourning clothes she was wearing for her mother. You know, of course, that 6 months of wearing black in mourning is the fashion for the death of a parent. But it had been 10, and Jean Maurice finally demanded, go and put on something with a bit more color in it. And well, she had, and then she had refused to brush her hair or do really anything at all. If she wasn't going to be allowed to mourn her mother, she didn't want anything to do with anything. She hated me the moment she saw me. I represented everything wrong in the world. Can I forgive her? Of course I can forgive her. She was 12 years old. She had lost her mother. She loved her mother, loved her still, even dead. She spent rather an inordinate amount of time at her mother's grave, kneeling or praying or weeping. It was in the back garden. Jean Maurice was rather odd that way, having her buried there in the back garden as opposed to, well, say, in the city cemetery. Well, he returned from Nancy with pearls for me and dresses for my girls and oh, so many sweets for everyone. And a little stick for Ella, a bit of hazel. She planted it there on her mother's grave. Now, even I could tell it had been dead for rather a long time, and a few days passed, and then I went to the gardener, and I commanded him that in the middle of the night, where Ella couldn't see, he was to take it away and replant a hazel stalk, something green, and water it, and do whatever it is gardeners do, until it was sure to flourish, but always out of her sight. I am a baroness. I am allowed to make eccentric demands of my servants. How else will they have anything about which to gossip? Well, Ella always picked at her food at meals. She didn't even want to be in the same room with any of us. And I went to the cook and I asked her if she might always have a little something or other set aside in case Ella was hungry and came looking for food, late at night. And eventually, she did begin speaking with the cook, talking, confiding in her hatred of me, of the world, of everything else. And so I took matters a little bit into my own hands. I declared that if she was going to dress like a servant and spend so much time in the kitchen, she might as well work there. One more mark against her evil stepmother, but at least she was talking with someone. When she began sleeping there, in the ashes of the fire no less, that caught us all by surprise. And, well, my daughters, they were 14 and 16. They were cruel as only young women can be, and you know the name. They gave her that terrible nickname, and soon everyone in the house, even Jean-Maurice, was calling her Cinderella. Much can be said of me. Much can be said of me, but I have never called her that name. I do not care what the stories tell you. Time passed, like it does, and, well, then the invitation came to the prince's ball. Now, I remember being that age. They were 16, 17, 18, when a ball like that was everything I could have possibly wanted in the world. Wait, anything might happen at a ball like that. And then, the day of the ball, Ella, who has barely spoken to me in 5 years, comes up to me. She looks me in the eye and tells me she wants to go to the ball. And I laughed, I did, which she stormed away, another grievance against her wicked stepmother, which was good because it meant I didn't have to make up some ridiculous task for her, picking lentils out of ashes or something just as terrible to keep her occupied. Because you see, when the ball had been announced, let us just say that I provided for all of my family. I laid the dress, the one I had made for Ella, atop the hazel bush that now flourished upon her mother's grave. My seamstress had outdone herself. The stories, they will tell you that dress shone as bright as the sun, as pale as the moon, that it sparkled like the stars. The stories did that dress no justice. I set the shoes and the jewelry there beneath the hazel bush. I learned later that it was my cook who brushed and washed and braided Ella's hair, did it up in the coach, the unmarked coach without livery or crest, driven by a masked coachman and attended by a masked footman that arrived at the gates of our house an hour after we had left. Favors owed. Favors called in. Now, neither Jean-Maurice, nor Henriette, nor Dominique recognized the woman who swept down that grand staircase into the prince's ball, the woman in the dress, with those shoes that sparkled like glass. She looked so very different with a clean face and done-up hair. I do not know if I would have recognized her as well. Though, it was so much more than that, you know. All that hatred of me, of her father, of the world, of her dear dead mother, it all came pouring out in a regal haughtiness. It is no wonder she caught the prince's eye. You think me cruel? That I would save the best dress for the girl not my own? A girl that hated me for 5 years and will go on hating me probably for all of her life? Let me try to explain. My husband is noble only by marriage. I am the 5th daughter of an earl and the widow of a baron. My daughters, they will be happy to marry noble men at all. And at the ball, their dresses were some of the most beautiful there. I saw to that. And they will tell the tale of dancing with a prince to their grandchildren, but for them it was just a ball. It was a party. It was a frivolity. But for Ella, it was a chance, and I intended to stack the deck as high as I possibly could in her favor. When the clock chimed midnight, she ran. Clever girl. If you give a man everything, he will have no use for you. But if you keep him in mystery and suspense, he is yours. leaving the shoe there on the steps of the castle, that was a particularly fine touch. And whether the prince or his guards or his servants saw the house to which that unmarked carriage went, if Ella was clever enough to ask the coachman to rein up just enough so that they could be seen, I don't know. But what I do know is that a little bird whispered in the ear of the wife of the prince's gentleman of the bedchamber, and, well, ours was not the first house they came to the next day, but it was before lunch that the royal coach reined up in our courtyard. Oh, I did not stop Ella from being there. The whole house gawked as he swept into our foyer. She was back in her common clothes. She looked like a servant, and the prince did not recognize her. Maybe that means something. Maybe it doesn't. Both of my daughters tried on the shoe, and, well, Dominique was prepared to cut off her toe to make it fit. I put a stop to that. And then the prince says a little too loudly, "Are there any other women of the house who might have been at the ball?" And as if on my cue, I cry out, "Oh no, not Ella, she is much too dirty." She shouldered her way through, glaring daggers at me, that second shoe in her hand, and off they rode. I know she didn't want us invited to the wedding, but her father had to give her away, and just think of the impropriety of it all if we hadn't been there. Oh, even out of favor, her sisters, my daughters, they were so eminently more eligible than they had been before. We had no end of suitors. They both married well, far higher above their station than they could have ever dreamed. And both of them to good men. So, call me the villain if you would like. I have done what I have done. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
oh, super, just brilliant, brilliant. You,
Oh,
every time you amaze me of just how you think about and develop the perspective that we've never seen before. Just lovely. Thank you so much.
oh, thank you.
Ah,
It was a
wow.
fun story to pull back out.
Lovely, lovely. Well, I'm also in my mind, who names their son Charming?
Who names their son Charming? Who does that?
Yes, right. Anyway, thank you so much. So, Andy, I would ask if you would bring everybody back, and we can have everybody in front of us, and we'll go through and see what people have coming up next on their plates that they'd like to share. And let me suggest that everybody save the chat. There's been lots of wonderful things people have been saying about the delight of the stories that you've told, tellers, and information about the tellers. So please save your chat. Okay, Laura, what do you got coming up? Where's Laura? Oops, she's not here yet. I'm sorry, Beverly's here. I thought you had gone.
Here,
Beverly,
no,
Beverly, tell us what's up next for you.
I'm going July 3rd to India for Eric Miller event. And I'm going to be doing a tandem story with Susan Bucco, Ida Bucco, and we're going to do the little black doll. And that's what we're going to do. And then I do a lot of stories in Australia. I went there Saturday night and I did the same story that I did tonight there this past Saturday. So I really enjoy finding out where there are Zoom meetings all over. So if anybody could please tell me, I like to visit, and it's not just telling the stories, but I really love listening to stories. And wow, this group tonight was off the charts. So everyone, I mean, I could tell why every event, I mean, that not event, but group that picked all of you. I know now why, because you were all great. I mean, I really had a great time tonight. I was laughing away and everything.
Excellent, excellent.
Some of you could get in touch with me, and even I'm a beginning storyteller, so I would love to possibly work with some of you. Susan took me under her arm, and she's been teaching me tandem stories and how to research and make sure that, you know, they're free to the debating you can do. I mean, I never knew about any of that stuff, you know, so I'm really asking, I guess, all of you to, you know, kind of, if you want to tell me and teach me a few things, you know, and I would appreciate it. Okay.
Super. Thank you very much. Okay. Now, Laura, please tell us what's next for you. What's happening in Long Beach and beyond?
Yeah. So in Long Beach, our monthly oh, excuse me, our monthly meetings are supposed to be on the first Wednesday of every month. During the pandemic, things really died off for us. But I have been working to revive that. So I'm going to put in the chat. I do 2 storytelling concerts a year. One is Liars, Thieves, and Chocolate, an Evening of Story, which we just had in June. And we have liars and thieves, also known as, storytellers, and lots of chocolate. We will have Celebration on November 11th here in Long Beach. And then I will put in the chat my landing page for Liars, Thieves, and Chocolate, which has a place where you can put your email address to join my email list. If you would like to receive information from me to join in for our story swaps on the first Wednesday of the month, I can put that on there.
Excellent. And is it only in person or also online?
The story swaps are going to be virtual.
Oh, super.
That'll be Zoom. The things at the Nature Center are going to be are in person. And if anybody knows anybody in Antarctica, please tell me, because I'm trying to bring Celebration to Antarctica. And so far I'm stumbling. So I would love to know if anybody knows anybody.
Who you should get in touch with is Ingrid Nixon, who just came back, I think, from Antarctica.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
I know who Ingrid is.
Excellent. So if she will have contact for you if she doesn't seem to fit what you need. But yeah,
Awesome.
there you go. Super. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Peter, please tell us what's up, what's coming next for you. You muted, Peter. You need to unmute.
That helps. Good. So little in the way of storytelling, because I'm also involved in other telling about environmental stories and things that are taking place that I would like people to be aware of. So it'll be a while before I get back to my normal storytelling, but happily enough, we have story masters for our telling at least once a month.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much. Katie, Miss Katie, what's happening up north?
Well, of course, the Do Tell Story Swap of Sonoma County is alive and well, and always welcome tellers and listeners. And we have some great stories going. And I am going to be telling a longer story to a group. Actually, it's a yoga group. I'm going on a yoga retreat. And so I'm excited about that because I'm bringing sound into my stories. So I have a C drum and another drum, and I've also have a gong. So I'm working with those, always experimenting.
Super. And when is your yoga retreat?
It's like the 10th of July.
Oh, lovely. Lovely. We'll all want to hear about that, how that went for you.
Thank you.
David, what's coming up for you?
Well, the Sacramento Story Guild has their monthly swap meet. And actually, I just wanted to mention that last month they did the first ever Sacramento Storytelling Festival. It was a big success.
It was. I was there.
Oh, wow, nice. And on a personal level, I decided to I'm going back to doing just very select in-person storytelling for seniors. And when I do my storytelling, I do a creative storytelling group where I take a photo and the audience gets to pick things, say stuff about the photo, and then I improv the story. So it's a collaborative story effort.
Oh.
And so I'm starting to do that again, but I'm just doing it in very select places currently.
Fascinating. That's really interesting. Good for you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aunt Leanne, what's coming up for you?
I just put storytellersofsandiego.org and my email, auntleanne@gmail.com in there. We've got Highland Games, which are coming up if you happen to be in our area it's North County, San Diego, so it's even closer to Long Beach. Laura. The Highland Games kickoff concert Friday night at 7. Marilyn McPhee and Lisette Ryan will be telling also on Saturday during the games, and I'll be telling on Sunday during the games. But the Friday night concert is going to be really wonderful. It'll be live. We have a fiddler and a harpist who are playing along with us, and shortbread, McLaren shortbread, in fact. And let's see, also I've been working with the Armed Services Arts Partnership. So if you have any relatives, or if you yourself are a spouse or child or vet or currently serving or anything like that, you can go to asap.org, and they're offering live stream teaching that I'll be doing this summer with Nick Baskerville, and also different areas in person, including San Diego. I'll be doing 6 weeks in the fall of Saturdays, storytelling teaching.
Thank you so much. Fabulous. And Cooper, what's coming up?
So for those of you that don't know, I host a show called Fairy Tale Variations, where we take usually one specific fairy tale, and then one person tells it sort of straight or original to remind people that, you know, Cinderella's stepsisters cut off their toes to fit into the shoe, and all of those things that Disney, the mouse before the stories before the mouse, as we were reminded. So we have Fairy Tale Variations coming up on July 1st, and then 4 other tellers each then progressively play with the story. So on July 1st, we're doing Jack Tales. So no one core story, but we're going to have Ingrid Nixon, who was just mentioned, and Simon Brooks and Paul Strickland, who told his first fairy tale on our show, who is an amazing teller, and we keep getting him back to tell fairy tales. And myself and Rachel Ann Harding will be telling Jack Tales. That will be July 1st. So I'm going to throw that in the chat. That's my one big thing coming up right now. If you have the desire to get in touch with me, my email's on there as well. And thank you all so much for inviting me out. This was really, really fun.
Well, thank you for coming. So tellers, I'm going to take a little picture of you all. So Peter, I need to see your beautiful face. So I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, and then I will click my thing. So 1, 2, 3. Great. Thank you so much. Gosh, well, we have what, 4 minutes to get any questions or comments from our audience. I want to make sure to thank Andrew again for our support.
Pleasure.
Support, always on time. And I think Fags is probably still here. I want to thank him as well. And thank you, audience, everyone, for coming. What a special night. So if you have a question in just a few minutes for our tellers, or any comments, please raise your hand, or I'm going to go back to see if I can get to gallery view, or you can put your hand up in the corner. Oh, now I get to see people who are here. Oh, cool, you guys, this is awesome. Well, I guess we're just filled with your stories. So tellers, once again, thank you so much. And everybody, happy midsummer. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Sarah.